Good afternoon. My name is Joel Hammond. I'm from the Princeton Learning Cooperative. I was one of the co-founders and current director there. I come from a family of teachers. My wife is a teacher. My dad was a teacher. My mother-in-law was a teacher. I have aunts who are teachers. Most of my friends are teachers. My mom was a secretary in school. I was a teacher for 11 years. Right? It's kind of like the family business. And I went into teaching with just an incredible amount of enthusiasm and idealism and belief in the power of schools. I was going to change kids' lives, right, and the world. And what I found out from my teaching career was that while I loved working with kids, I really and truly hated my job. I was a social studies teacher, and I was absolutely miserable. And I don't want to be sort of overly dramatic here, but I eventually, towards the end, just felt like a prison guard, right? Making kids who didn't want to be there in the first place do things they didn't want to do. I can tell you this is not a pleasant way to go through life, and certainly, not why I went into teaching. I wanted to help kids get better at the things that they loved, and to turn them on to life and opportunities, and certainly not force them to do things that they had no interest in. Right? And I had done well in traditional school growing up, and I liked it. But what I learned from teaching was that not everybody experiences school in that way. And that school is just not a good fit for a lot of really great kids. And you can imagine some of these types of kids, right? Kids who are just super bright, but just bored to death in school. Kids who don't like the social atmosphere of being bullied. Kids with learning differences that it's hard for the schools to address. Some who don't want 3 hours of homework a night. Some who have a strong passion like dance or computers, and sort of school gets in the way of that. And to be honest, some kids would rather just be tromping through the woods, or like building engines, right, than sitting still and listening to people talk for 7 hours a day, right? And so just like many of the teenagers who sort of feel stuck in school, I was stuck too. And I knew I had to get out. A small problem though, if you're a teacher and you don't like school, what do? Right, I was pretty desperate. I would spend nights Googling things like jobs for teachers who hate teaching, and things like that, right? And about this time, I was rereading a book I had read when I first got out of college. It's called The Teenage Liberation Handbook. And as I was reading that, again, I came across this little section, maybe like 2 sentences, and it described this place called Pathfinder. And it sounded interesting to me, and so I looked around for it. And I found that it had changed its name to North Star. And I eventually tracked down their website, and I can still remember this night vividly, right? I'm sitting in my office upstairs at my house. It's maybe 11 o'clock at night, just dreading going to work the next day, right? And as I'm reading their website, and I'm finally starting to understand what North Star is doing and the way that they work with kids, I literally jumped up and down in my office and did like a little Irish jig sort of around the room. And because this was it, I found exactly what I was looking for, right? And so what was it that got me so excited? What was North Star doing that seemed so great? Well, imagine those kids that were stuck in school. Maybe some people in the crowd were one of them, right? Show of hands, anybody felt stuck in school back then? See a couple hands back there, right? When one of these types of kids complain to adults about school, the answer they often get is, sorry kid, right? Like, you're just gonna have to put up with it, right? You might not like it now, but if you don't go to school, you're not gonna go to college, you're not gonna get a good job, and you're gonna end up penniless and homeless and addicted to drugs and flipping burgers or something like that. But that's the usual choice that our kids are given by adults, right? You go to school even if you hate it, or else you're gonna end up in the gutter. Well, fortunately, those are not the only 2 options, right? Schooling and learning are not the same thing. And what a lot of people don't know is that you don't have to attend school to have a successful and meaningful life. You don't need to attend high school to go to college even. In fact, by not going to high school, you can actually start college early, as many of our members at the Princeton Learning Cooperative do at 16 and 17 years old. And so there's this whole world of opportunities for teens who don't go to school. And what is great about living and learning without school is that you have a lot more freedom and flexibility to design the kind of life and education that you want, based on who you are, what you're good at, and sort of where you see yourself going. In the United States, this idea of learning without school is called homeschooling. It's a terrible name for what it can be, right? Homeschooling doesn't have to mean you're just replicating the structure of school at home. It doesn't have to mean that parents are teaching their own kids. It's simply the legal mechanism that allows kids to leave school and have the freedom and flexibility to build the kind of life that they want for themselves. And so many families, even if school is not going well for their children, don't feel like they could take on that kind of responsibility for themselves. And so they don't consider it a realistic option in place of school. And that's where the Princeton Learning Cooperative comes in. And so PLC supports these families to make living and learning without school a possibility. We provide a lot of academic and non-academic support to help teens build a satisfying and meaningful life. We mentor teens, we offer a range of classes and tutorials, we help to find sort of work and volunteer opportunities in the community, we help with college admissions down the road, and we just provide a safe and comfortable and welcoming environment and community of teens and adults. And the whole endeavor is sort of based on a core premise. Everything that happens at PLC is voluntary. We don't make young people do any particular thing. We help them to pursue their interests and reach their goals, not our sort of preconceived, our goals, right? And so lucky for me, as I was searching around, North Star was holding their first ever replication conference in the summer of 2007. And it would show interested folks how to create a program like North Star in their community. So my wife and I went up to visit North Star in that spring, and then I went to the summer conference, and it was great. I was convinced, like, this is what I wanted to do with my life. And so through some mutual friends, I was able to connect with Paul Scott. In the winter of 2009, he was a disgruntled math teacher at a private school around here. And we sat down and just started talking about education, what kind of structures we could put together for students who didn't fit the traditional mold of public and private schools. And so Paul was fed up with his teaching job as well, and so he left and was available suddenly to be the staff member at what would become the Princeton Learning Cooperative. And so we started PLC in the fall of 2010, and it was Paul and 5 kids in a tiny little room in the Arts Council building here in Princeton, and it was great. They would go for hikes when the mood would strike them. Volunteers would come through and discuss philosophy. They'd build some robots, do some math. And this idea of leaving school and to have more control of your life and education can profoundly improve the lives of young people. And I'll just relate the story of one of our members to kind of illustrate how this can work. One of our current members is a freshman at Lawrence High School, which is just down the road here. And he was just going increasingly frustrated and probably angry at school, right? The social atmosphere for him was bad. He didn't like what he was being asked to do. And to a large degree, was starting to shut down in some pretty serious ways. And I've taught a lot of kids like this in high school. And if you play this scenario out over 4 years, the results are usually not good, right? This is not a path that we want young people to be walking down. So he and his parents, made the decision to leave school and join PLC. And what we do with all our kids, we asked them, what kind of things are you interested in? How would you want to spend your time if you're not sitting in school 7 hours a day? And he gave us one of the classic responses of all time. He said he was interested in blacksmithing, ham radio, guitar, and conversational Russian. Right? Now, when I was a teacher, if one of my students was like, "Hey, Mr. Hammond, I'm interested in ham radio and conversational Russian," sorry, kid, get back to, I got nothing for you, get back to filling out that worksheet, right? It wouldn't work, right? But because we're not a school, and we have more flexibility, we can access the entire resources of the community, as well as what's at PLC. So, we started reaching out. The guy we know, some of you might know him, Pete Abrams, is a local guy. If you've been by the Arts Council building, you've seen those structures outside, like the homes made out of pallets. You ever driven by there? That's Pete Abrams that does that. And so, hey, Pete, you know any blacksmiths? And he was like, yes, the blacksmith of Trenton. He's like this 80-year-old Ukrainian guy.
He's great.
He's awesome, right? And he takes apprentices, right? And so, to our member here, have this phone number, call this guy. And so he sets up, apprenticeships, on Saturday mornings. Princeton, we started Googling it. Princeton has a ham radio club, apparently. What do you know? So we emailed over there, hey, do you have any volunteers who would be willing to come over and work with this kid to get him his license in ham radio? Yes, right? So we had a guy come over and start working with him, once a week. We had a guitar class already going on at PLC, so we joined that, but he also did School of Rock, if you're familiar with that organization, out in the community. And we just sent an email to our sort of network of people, like, hey, anybody know conversational Russian? We had 3 people reply. And we're like, sure. And so we hooked him into that, right? And as well as other things at PLC that he got involved in. And so all of a sudden, this kid who a couple weeks ago was hating life, right? And what he was doing on a daily basis has interesting things that he's plugged into. And he has loving and caring adults supporting him to find out what he wants in life. And he has this whole community of other teens as well, right? And I can't tell you how big of a transformation this can be in young people's lives, right? And this is what I get to do on a daily basis, and I get paid for it. And it probably goes without saying that I love my job, right? And so in terms of the kind of big picture of the organization and sort of what we're doing. In the last 5 years, PLC went from those 5 kids in that one room to being full at the moment with a waiting list. We've actually also created another center in Pennsylvania called the Bucks Learning Cooperative. Just started up in September. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. We're funded through membership fees in our school, through membership fees and donations. We don't receive any federal or state money. And we also don't turn any family away for financial reasons. We made a commitment when we started PLC that we were going to work with all interested families as long as they have space, regardless of their financial situations. And we also made a decision when we started PLC that we wanted to be financially sustainable from our operations. That is, we don't rely on grants and donations really to fund our day-to-day operations. And we decided to do that because reliance on those seemed a little bit like introducing some risk and kind of weakness into it. What if the big donor decides not to do it? What if the grant agency cuts their funding or decides on different priorities or whatever? So we wanted to be okay regardless of that. And so we haven't really written for a whole lot of grants, and we definitely have had generous donors, but it's more icing on the cake and helps us do things, additional things we wouldn't be able to do and not necessarily fund day-to-day operations. And so just like our teens benefit from having mentors, all of our members have a staff mentor that they work with, PLC has been really lucky to have great mentors helping us along as well. The big one was Ken Danford from North Star up in Massachusetts. We could have fumbled around for years trying to figure this out, and they were very generous with their time up there and sort of cut years and years off of our learning curve. And personally, also, I was a teacher. I knew. Before we started PLC, I knew absolutely nothing about business or running a small business or anything. And so, personally, I've also been helped just tremendously by Mike Agliero, who's one of our PLC parents, and he's also the owner of Gold Medal Service, which is like the largest plumbing and heating and HVAC service company in Central Jersey. And so he's helped me tremendously with business practices like marketing, systems, and customer relations, and also just sort of the mindset that goes along with creating and running a business. And so the big picture, the really big picture of our movement looks really promising. We're really excited about what's going on. And the basic idea is that this kind of learning is not for everybody, right? In the same way that being an entrepreneur and running your own business is not for everybody, right? I certainly wouldn't have gone to PLC if it was an option when I was in high school. I wouldn't have felt the need for that. But it absolutely should be a possibility for every teen in the country. There should be thousands of these places all over, right? And so just, as there's lots of miserable teachers, there's lots of miserable teens in every community in the country, right? And it seems simple enough to just put them together and do this instead of school, right? And so we, staff from PLC and from North Star, created a new umbrella organization called Liberated Learners. And that organization is specifically created to support educators to create places like PLC in their community. And so we have 10 centers now in our network throughout the United States and Canada, and a couple more of them are coming online in the next year. And so right now, we do Liberated Learners sort of part-time as well as PLC full-time. But what we want to do is sort of ramp up the work of Liberated Learners and have staff there full-time so we can start to support the creation of these centers on a sort of exponential scale as opposed to one here and there. Like I said, I want to see thousands of these places around in my lifetime. And so there's a lot of ways you can get involved. This sounds good. If you'd like to write a multi-million-dollar check, so Liberated Learners can fund the startup of 1,000 of these places. Feel free, right? We're not gonna turn you away. But we also have a whole lot of just many volunteers in the communities, including Gary, who's been awesome and been with us 2 years.
2 years, yeah.
2 years now. I think coming back for 3.
Yeah,
Please.
I'd like to.
Who've just been great. So we have a lot of community volunteers working with our teens, leading classes, tutoring or providing internship opportunities. And we can also use help on our board of directors, and there's lots of ways to be involved in the Princeton community locally, but then also at that sort of national, international scale as well. So you can find out more about the Princeton Learning Cooperative at www.princetonlearningcooperative.org, and you can learn more about Liberated Learners at www.liberatedlearnersinc.org as well. Thank you very much.